So, Batman, the character, was made back in 1939 by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Now, contrast that with Flash Gordon, made 5 years earlier in 1934. Riddle me this. Batman, we're still making movies about, but Hollywood hasn't made a Flash Gordon movie in years. So, what's the difference? It doesn't seem to make much difference how old it is, but for some reason, Batman is the character, and his whole story seems to still be interesting to people, and they want to remake it and make new and update and so forth, but not Flash Gordon. Isn't that interesting? Well, the answer to this riddle, along with my take on the new movie, spoiler free, is what we're going to talk about today. So I was really excited for this movie. I've been watching the previews, and I've been a humongous Batman fan ever since I was 3 years old, and I could draw little bat figures. But on a deeper level, I am still intrigued by this question. Of course, here at the Imaginarium, I'm always wondering, what is the deeper meaning of these fantastical narratives? Now, you could argue that Batman's not all that fantastical. What I mean, come on. It's pretty fantastical. Even with the lack of superpowers and all that sort of thing, it's still fantastical storytelling. It's still superheroes, etc. So the question is, why are we still so fascinated with this character, whereas other things that have been around for just as long, if not longer, have fallen by the wayside? Well, the answer is resonance. So resonance is this quality of a narrative that I describe in my works that has to do with how sticky it is and how emotionally impactful it is. So if you watch a story, or you hear a story, or even read a book, and it really gets to you, it really hits you, then it's more resonant. And there's a bunch of factors that go into what makes things resonant and what makes things not resonant. And we can get into that, of course, later, or other videos maybe. But it boils down to this. With every telling or retelling or reimagining or rebooting or revisioning or whatever it is, people will add stuff and change things around to a particular story. There's been a zillion different stories about Batman. But some of them work and some of them don't. But the stuff that works gets retained. So when I make my latest, newest, most awesome version of Batman, I'm going to retain all those things of the past versions of the story that worked and were resonant, and people felt really connected with them, and I'm going to ignore all the rest of it. Okay, so for example, Batman, parents were killed, gunned down in the street. He was extremely wealthy. He uses his anger and his wealth to transform himself into a crime-fighting superhero. Those are the things that have not changed ever since the very first iteration of Batman in issue 27 of Detective Comics. So a whole ton of stuff, of course, has been added to that since then, and whole versions of the story and all of his various adventures and so forth. And some of them, like the villains, like the Joker and the Penguin, and these characters, the Riddler, they were added on and sort of added to the canon, the building canon, right? And there's very much a similar way in which mythic storytelling works this way as well. I have gotten into that in some of my other videos, particularly the one that talks about Lady Godiva. But the point is, there's also a bunch of stuff that's told about Batman that has been blissfully forgotten about. For example, there's been stories where Batman was turned into a bat baby and had to fight crime, pint size, but was still with the mask and all that on. There was the infamous Batmite character, who was a deliberately goofy and campy character. There was Zebra Batman. There were villains like Condiment King, right? Who have sometimes they add him into newer iterations of like the animated Batmans, just basically for humor. because it's such an over-the-top, goofy character, and they're doing it for effect. Nevertheless, there's other stories where, for example, there's a storyline where Batman was enraged with Robin because he was listening to rock and roll music. Gasp. All right. There was another one where during their phase where they were going ultra dark and ultra gritty, where Batman was psychotically abusive to Robin and forcing him to eat rats. It's ridiculous. This stuff is ridiculous. That stuff all gets forgotten about, though, and someone else comes along and says, hey, I want to do a Batman story. They're going to keep the stuff that worked, and they're going to forget about the rest of it. So let's just taking a look at the movies. All right, well, we had the Adam West Batman, which was campy and silly and melodramatic, and all of the villains were just, mustache twirling, wah-ha-ha-ha, I'm going to take over the world kind of guys. And Batman was pure morally upstanding and so forth. Basically, he was just kind of a father knows best sort of guy in a bat mask. Tim Burton comes along. We've got 1989 Batman, which was a big splash because of how dark it was. And they introduced the idea of some moral complexity into Batman. It was still over the top and it was still pretty goofy, but there was a lot to recommend it. And of course, there was the style change. Fast forward again, you get Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Another shift. There's even more moral complexity. It's much more grounded. We progress again to 2016, and you've got Batman v Superman with Ben Affleck. Again, the darkness and the moral complexity and the groundedness is a little more difficult to maintain groundedness because Superman's running around in your story, but there you go. And now we have this one, 2022. And this one is it's very grounded. It does have a sort of element of the Burton-esque gothic feel to it. And it includes a lot of this great stuff that's been going on since the 80 plus years that Batman's been around. And through all those storytelling filters, if you would. And it adds its own new stuff as well. And you're starting to see then that Batman and his rogues gallery of weirdos and all of his fighting crime and crime bosses and all that sort of thing is starting to become a mythic hero. Now I'm going to get into this more when we do the spoiler video. I'm going to bring in my buddy Nick for that one. And we're going to talk more about that and the symbolism and why that's there. Because I think that Batman has become a symbol of an American demigod-like character who is representative of us as a culture. So much like The Godfather or even The Great Gatsby, these are stories that boil down the essence of primarily American issues and then represent them in the symbolic format. Very dreamlike. But without getting too deep into all that, stick around for the upcoming spoiler video on that to hear more about that. But let's just talk about this movie. Superhero movies are great. I love them. I've always loved superhero stuff. I love all sorts of stuff, sci-fi, fantasy, and just, nerdy into the extreme. But I feel like that a lot of the Marvel movies have become, I enjoy them, but they're a lot like candy. They're like cinematic Reese cups. I eat them, they're yummy, and then I forget about them. There's not a whole lot of substance to them. This movie is like a steak dinner with all the trimmings. There's so much going on here. I do believe, it's brilliant. It's 3 hours long. It's complex, but it's not too complex. It's just the right length, I think. This version of Batman is very intimidating. There's a very strong sort of Darth Vader-esque feel to him as he emerges from the shadows like we first saw him way back in 1977. Well, some of us saw that. He doesn't jump around and swing a whole lot. There is a little bit of that, but he doesn't do that as much as in previous iterations. Instead, he just sort of menacingly appears and he stares down, the bad guys, and it's very effective. I think Robert Pattinson has done a fantastic job here there's so much going on that he conveys merely with his eyes, and so I'm very impressed with that. He's tortured. We see him in a very dark place at the beginning, but he undergoes a change. And without getting too much into the depths of that, um, this introduces a really interesting element that I hope you'll see. Now the Gotham in this version is drenched in shadows and neon and drugs and toxic people, and it's ultra artificial, but also it's got endless sheets of rain, just soaking every corner of it. So it's dripping with atmosphere, which is very typical of the noir genre, which of course Batman has somehow merged with over the years. And I say somehow, but I mean it is a perfect fit. Again, a noir is primarily an American style of genre storytelling, the detective noir, and again, him being a detective, it sort of fits, right? But it's film noir, but with a fantastical element to it, an almost, but not quite, supernatural element to it. I have come across counter criticisms of it that I've seen. People complaining that it's too long, that it has too many endings, that Batman is emo, that Batman and Gordon make mistakes. He's 2 years into it, so of course he's making mistakes, or whatever. Or they don't like the ending. They think there's various problems with the ending that I won't get into that. But honestly, I think all of this stuff is really low-hanging fruit. I would expect critics to know better than to, take pot shots like this. It's obvious that Reeves has really put a lot of thought into how he wanted to craft this film, and all of the choices and all the stuff that these people are taking pot shots at, you can make easy explanations as to why they were chosen to be done that way. The length, for example, it's done that way because it established the atmosphere. If you're not patient enough with that, then you're not going to appreciate it. But I did. If you compare this, say, to the Christopher Nolan films, which I adore, those films were so chock full with plot that you really never get a chance to breathe that much, which is fine for what he was doing. Christopher Nolan does that. That's just one of his things. All of his movies are really almost overstuffed with plot. But that keeps them interesting and exciting, right? So there's a lot going on. But you don't ever have a chance to really soak in the atmosphere like you do here with this movie, which for Batman works tremendously well. Batman has always been an extremely atmospheric character, so it makes perfect sense. So, my final thoughts on it really are that I think it's an excellent film. It's a great superhero film. One of the best, if not maybe the best iteration of Batman on the big screen so far. And it really gets at the heart of Batman. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in the spoiler video, but Batman is at its heart always been about trauma and separation and how we recover from it. Even the very first iteration of Batman had the bit about his parents being shot and him taking that trauma and turning it into becoming Batman. And with each time we see a new version of Batman, it takes that to the next level, takes it a little bit more seriously, and really asks the question, okay, what would that really look like? The early versions of it, obviously, it's just sort of a plot gimmick used to create this guy. But as we progressed with the story, each time we talk about Batman, we take that idea a little bit more seriously, and the trauma spreads from him to the villains and to Gotham itself. So, overall, I think that the Batman is a masterful work of American mythic storytelling, and I really enjoyed it. So, Anyway, that's what I have for you today. Let me know if you like this kind of stuff. If you like me going over, uh, new mythic movies, and even I can do novels. I can do whatever. And just let me know if you want to see more of that kind of stuff. And until then, thanks for watching.